Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you are watching this. This is Sam Prentice Makes Things Happen. I'm Sam Prentice, back once again making it happen, and today we are talking about the RatRig Vcore3, and specifically we're talking about Klipper. My guests today are Mikkel from RatRig.
Oh yeah.
And Michael Laws from Teaching Tech.
And this brings us to the main event.
Let's get straight on into this.
They call him Klipper, Klipper, faster than lightning. No one you see.
And welcome, Michael from Teaching Tech. How the devil are you, sir?
Very well, Sam. Thank you very much for having me.
No worries. Well, thank you for joining us. You, in my mind, are kind of a Klipper expert. I know you don't claim to be, but your content on your Teaching Tech channel has, helped me time and time again. With Klipper and with VcoreOS, I'm keen to get to the bottom of what the key differences are of these things. Are they the same? Are they different? What is the complexity behind this? And what's your vision of Klipper as we kind of move forward? Because I know not only the VCore system, but also we share another printer, which is the FL Sun SR as well, which I'm hugely impressed with. And I love that as a Delta printer. And I know you've Klipperized yours as well. What's the fascination also with Klipper?
Sure. Okay, so the first thing we can probably touch on is the VcoreOS package versus Klipper. So you said you've got the Super Racer, and say you wanted to Klipperize yours. I've made videos. I've gone through all the steps, setting up the screen, setting up the firmware, getting the configuration right for the main board. Imagine if I got my SD card out of the Raspberry Pi, running it, put it on my computer, and then made an image. And then I put that on the internet, so you could then download that image, put it in yours, and then you change your Wi-Fi details, and that's it. Everything is already set up, ready to go. So when I did my series, I did it on the Super Racer as well as the CR10 Max to try and show two different ways to do it, and there's more options for some of them, like screens and things like that. So imagine that somebody had a machine, went through all of these choices and picked what they thought was best for that machine, set it all up, and then took a snapshot of that installation and made it downloadable so anyone else could come along, download that, and all of that installation, all of those decisions were already made, and you have a basis that you can then customize from. So it's basically a way for people who aren't familiar with Klipper to have a lot of the hard work done and have an excellent foundation to build on. Does that make sense?
It does, totally. I mean, it's very similar in that sense that, Octoprint. And so my background is working with Marlin Octoprint. And we conversed a little bit on email over the last couple of weeks about some of the options that you get within Klipper. And we will go back to the VCore system and talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But what was interesting to me is, can you get Octoprint and the time-lapsing functions and things like that on your Klipper system? So, and it sort of blew my mind a little bit, because if you're not following somebody else's video or process and you're trying to find your feet and do this yourself, when I've been doing this myself, I found that there's a ton of other options. And I'm like, well, I wonder what that does. And I wonder what Mainsail does. And I wonder what these APIs all do. And you get to a point where it's kind of like, man, I don't know. I don't want to touch any of that other stuff because I don't understand it. And when you start looking online, there's just a huge plethora of information out there. And it's very difficult sometimes to go, well, this is the machine I've got. This is the setup what I would like. So it's kind of like a realization thing. What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Like when I first covered Klipper a couple of years ago, I did it through Octoprint because Fluid and Mainsail weren't available. And then when building the RatRig, they used Fluid with VcoreOS, so I had exposure to that. And I haven't installed Mainsail personally, but I've been through the documentation when I was making my other videos, and it does look very similar in concept to Fluid. So because I was forced to have exposure to those two sides, that helped me understand them. But I can completely understand what you're saying, where someone coming in who's used neither, I mean, how do they make that decision? You would really need a video or a website that showed them side by side. This is the interface to upload, this and this. This is the interface for editing the configuration, this and this. And you can see the pros and cons. This is how plugins work for this one versus this. That's, I suppose, the type of resource you would need to make an educated decision between the two. what I would say to people, unless they have something really particular in mind, both solutions are pretty good. Okay. I think Fluid and Mainsail have advantages in terms of Klipper configs and things like that. The interfaces are a little bit nicer. Most people, I would say, go with that. But for the Super Racer, I went with Octoprint because it's soon to be modified to need the continuous print plugin. And as far as I know, there's nothing like that available on Fluid or Mainsail. So that's the only reason I went with that. But I can still print, I can still upload, I can still do all of the general things that core functionality is going to be covered by both. So it's just the little details that should dictate what decision you make.
Okay, so let's just cover this back off again. VcoreOS and Klipper are essentially the same.
It's just a pre-packaged version with everything already set up.
Okay, so would your suggestion be to follow what the RatRig guys have done, or would you suggest, or would you even have a pre-compiled version of that ready to upload onto your SD card?
Well, that's more or less what happens when you do VcoreOS. You download their image, flash it to your SD card, and you're up and running. If you're talking about, as an alternative, setting it all up yourself from scratch, unless you really needed Octoprint for something, I don't really see the point of it. Like, it's just so easy. I think in the video I called it stupid easy, and Mikkel was happy with that. But it was knowing, having set up Klipper from scratch in the past, just having something I could flash to a SD card, like when you install Octoprint and you just add your Wi-Fi and everything's going to work. That blew my mind. And I think in future for other manufacturers, if they're going to explore Klipper, I think that's the model they need to adopt. They need to set everything up and say, hey, if you want to do Klipper, download this and you'll be ready to go.
So, of course, the reason that you are, or we are, using Klipper is because of the speed and accuracy of the board, right?
Yep.
Why isn't more manufacturers going in this direction right now rather than staying with 32-bit boards stocked with Marlin?
Okay, so I reckon cost in terms of the final product and in terms of their development is going to be one thing. So if they're going to sell a board with Klipper, they probably need to include a Raspberry Pi. So therefore, they've got to pay for that, have it installed, all ready to go. Plus, they have to go through the steps in, like the RatRig guys did, in finding the right configuration. And it's worth pointing out, VcoreOS is not just it already set up, but they have options for all the different hardware. So depending on which extruder drive you use or which hot end, they're already supported by the firmware. So you just uncomment or comment which one you want. And they also have advantages in terms of updates. So they can update a certain aspect and then it's all automatic. So that's, they've gone 100% for that approach as opposed to Marlin. They're really committed to it. So for another manufacturer, I don't know if they're willing to commit that type of time to get on board. If you see Creality using old firmware for years, really old firmware, instead of ever starting with a new one, they just stick with what they know. Yep. So maybe it's a similar type of thing here.
Yeah, it could be. It's funny though, because FL Sun, for example, in conversations with those guys, they're saying, well, we've just tried to install Klipper and I'm getting this error. And they're coming back to me saying, well, what do you think this is? What do you think that is? And I'm thinking, oh, this is really good. And especially when you've got a manufactured product where, they're also exploring that. I don't ever see that with Creality. I don't ever see Creality saying, well, we're going to try this today. Let's see what happens. We see other people that are doing this online. We're going to see if we can apply this to our machines. What I found, certainly with open source companies such as RatRig, not so much FL Sun, but FL Sun are still having a good go at it. And I'm finding, and maybe you're the same, I'm finding a lot of people from FL Sun reaching out to me saying, well, what do you think of the machine? What could we be doing better? And I like that. I like the fact that they're actually caring about what the community is saying and, trying to implement changes to their next system. And I know they've got a much larger Delta style printer that's going to hopefully be coming out. I know it's in the idea of somebody's mind at the moment, but they were talking about a 300 bed, which is, going to be interesting to say the least. And I know RatRig for a little while, we're also teasing a Delta idea. So we shall see what happens with that, I guess, in the future. So going back to Klipper versus Marlin, what are the advantages / disadvantages of that system? And I've got a couple of questions around power. So auto resume and things like that. Now, I haven't nailed that particularly well. I was involved with a 3-day print the other day, and I was halfway through it, and I unplugged the wrong plug. And normally I have this stuff on a UPS, and it's normally in the studio, and it's not in this particular room. And that was the end of that. And I looked at the screen, and I was thinking, oh no, is there something here where I can hit the auto resume, or can it do that? I Googled, I was on the Klipper site, couldn't find it for love nor money. And that being the case, I had to start again. And it's a huge waste of time, although the V-Core system is super, super quick, certainly when you compare to an S5, for example. Is that an option that's there? Is it something that they're working on? Have you got a different solution for that problem?
All right. So specifically with power outage, I think Marlin, the way it handles it most of the time is it's constantly writing to the SD card through the print saying, if the power goes out, here's where you resume from. If the power goes out, here where you resume from. So when the machine's turned back on the SD card, if it sees that file, it's like, oh, I must be halfway to a print. Oh, this is what layer and what position and temperature, etc., and so forth. To do the same thing with Klipper, I mean, when you pause for filament changes, it supports variables and it can save its position and things like that. You would just need some sort of hardware on board to buy it some time to be able to save that position, save those variables. So I know Big 3 Tech sell a little bank of capacitors that I think does that type of thing. So I've got a couple here. I've never used them. Potentially, I think with macros and setting up some custom things. So for instance, you can have whatever custom stuff you want with input-output pins in Klipper. So if you want to set up a button to turn on and off a light or a fan or whatever else you can. So potentially you would run a hardware module like that and tell it, if this pin goes high, then the power's about to run out, run this macro. And the macro would be like the filament change one that saves the state. And I think that's how you would get around it. I haven't tried, but in my head, I think they're the pieces that would make it work.
Yeah, it was enormously frustrating, as you can imagine,
yes.
Especially when you're, it wasn't a small print at all. And I'm like, and it was my own fault as well. It wasn't like the power went out or anything like that. It was like I just unplugged the plug and went, oh, as everything just went, I was like, oh my God, what a nightmare. What an absolute nightmare. But it is what it is. These things happen.
I think another analogy. So you said a lot of your audience are coming from Marlin and they're used to Marlin. Just to understand how VcoreOS works. So somewhere like TH3D, they have their unified firmware. And for those that know, Tim starts with Marlin, downloads it, and then he sets up a bunch of changes to suit his particular machines that his customers use, as well as the mods that he sells. And then you can download that with all of those things set up to go. VcoreOS is probably close to that. So the RatRig guys have got Klipper, set it all up to suit their particular machine to make it easy for anyone using that machine, and then they package that ready to go. So it's still based on Klipper the same way that TH3D firmware still starts life as Marlin, but it's just been massaged and changed along the way and packaged so people downloading it have a lot of the hard work done for them.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. I'll tell you what, we had a bit of back and forth on finding it very difficult to go back to a slower machine since using the VCore3, right? How are you finding that? Because I'm, unless it's the Super Racer or the VCore3, I'm finding it very, very difficult to be printing at 50 millimeters per second. How does that work in your world?
I suppose in a way I'm forced because I might have a new machine coming in that I need to spend time on. I get used to that again. So I haven't printed anything on the RatRig for a tiny bit. I think after all the speed benchy stuff, I feel like I owe a bit of maintenance to it, just oiling the linear rails and things like that, getting it square, retensioning the belts, that type of thing. So I'm trying to give it a break until I get around to that. And then I've got a project I want to do on it. It's hard. It really is hard. Like, it changes your conception of what's possible. Sometimes you've got a certain amount of time to print something, or it's just a matter of patience, knowing, okay, I really want this object, but it's going to take, maybe I have to do it overnight because it's too many hours to wait for during the day. And all of a sudden those goalposts shift. You're like, I can print that and then this afterwards in the same time as another machine. So I'm not very patient with things like this.
That's exactly my point, and exactly why I've, because it's weird, because maybe a year or so ago, I had an interview with Michael Badley from the Printed Droids Club. We were talking about finding this machine that didn't suffer from inertia, didn't have the sweeping bed, and eventually I came across two things, Voron and RatRig. And RatRig kind of really worked for me because after reaching out to the guys and talking to what they were trying to do and talking about that whole thing was really, really interesting, and it works really well. So if you've got, a 3-day print and you can print it inside of a day, a few people have said, oh, you're only printing at 200 millimeters per second when it could do so much more. My concern with this whole thing is that if it does go wrong, then I'm in a whole world of hurt at that point, especially when I'm into a really big print, and time and filament costs are exhausted as far as I'm concerned. So I'm doing a large robot at the moment, and I printed the head. This is a good example on the S5, and I think that was a 5-day print. And we got a bit of failure around about 97%, because I can't remember the last time that I printed that high on the S5, and I was gutted. So we've had to print and make like a cap to go over the top of the head to obviously cover that up. But I know on the RatRig I would have probably smashed that out in a day and a bit, and I probably would have been all right. But unfortunately at that time I had something on that print bed. And the way I like to think about it is, if you're at a train station and there's a train waiting there, but it's the slow train, you could wait 30 more minutes to get the fast train. So you take the slow train because it's there, and you're sitting there on the train, and then 10, 15 minutes into your journey, the fast train goes past you, and if you'd waited a little bit longer, you probably would have been at your destination a hell of a lot quicker. And that is, the time restraints for me is just horrendous, and it's speed and quality. I think that's what you get with the VCore system.
Yeah, that was the thing for me. Like, I have another printer, Artillery 3D X1. I always had set up as my fast printer. In the slicer, I had higher feed rates, things like that. But it's a bed slinger, so i3 with the moving bed. And if I turn up the acceleration too much, I start to get a bit of ringing. But this, it's just so much faster. Like I said, it moves the goalposts, and the quality's better anyway. So there's no downside. And as you said, I could probably push it above 200 millimeters per second. Maybe I could push things a little bit more, but when I was doing speed benchy testing, I was happy to settle for that level. It was way faster than other machines. The quality was at least as good, so I could push things further, but I know it's going to work and be reliable, and doesn't rattle the bench too much at that speed.
Yeah, and what I love about the VcoreOS system is that you get the information on what that particular movement and what the speed of that movement is as well. Because you might think, I think certainly if you're using Marlin and you're saying, well, I'm turning it to 200%, I must be getting X, Y, and Z out of it. The reality is, on some of the movements, actually, you're not getting that super fast speed, but it actually shows you inside a Klipper as well. It may do that on other things, I don't know, because I'm not that well versed in it. But I was very, very interested in the flow rates, and that led on to talking to Dan from Slice Engineering about flow rates and what's faster and what's actually going to be slowing this machine down. What's your setup? What board did you use? What hot end did you use?
I went with all the recommended stuff. So everything, I could use VcoreOS, and everything was pre-packaged. So that was SKR Pro 1.2 main board from Big Tree Tech. I got a Raspberry Pi 4B because it was a nice machine, and that was the best one I had around. So, it's probably work equally well on a 3 as well, but I had a 4, so why not? Do you want other hardware, or mainly about the electronics?
What hot end did you go with?
Okay, so I started with an E3D V6, but I always had not a copperhead. What's the other one? I've forgotten the name of the
Mosquito.
Yeah, Mosquito Magnum, but not the Magnum Plus, which was like crazy expensive and brand new. Yeah. So I always had one of those ready to go, thinking I'd run out of flow on the E3D V6. And it wasn't until I really started pushing things with the speed benchy that happened. So for anyone who wants to print at that 200 millimeters per second 5K acceleration, like E3D V6 was perfectly fine for that. Extruder drive and orbiter, because I had one of those on a Second SK Go, and it's been working great ever since. So I stuck with that again. Happy with it. I remember when I made the video, people were like, oh, it's too small. You need to lubricate this. It's going to overheat. It's going to melt. no such problems on either printer. So,
well, I bought an orbiter because I saw that you had one. I've not installed it yet, but it's here. And I also got the Bondtech LGX as well. And I bought a couple of extra Chinese style ones that are mimics or copies or clones, whatever you want to call it. But talking about speedboat, speed benchy, I just want to bring somebody into the fold here because this chap here, Mr. Mikkel, how are you doing, sir?
Good morning.
Yes, I must apologize. The time thing is always a paradox that you know we trip over time and time again. So I must apologize for that. But let's move on from that. Let's talk about speed benchy just for a minute. You're the current champion, right?
I was beat like 20 hours after I did my 425.
No.
Yeah.
No way.
So I think the NX guys, Trails in particular in this case, had a 4-minute benchy just sitting around. So
that's great.
I had the world record for like 20 hours, but it was nice while it lasted.
That's something. That's certainly something. And of course, that was using the new Big Tree Tech Octopus Pro board.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
And Big Tree Tech are about to send me one of those. Michael, are you in on that as well?
I've got one, yeah. They sent me one, an early one, and apparently it has a problem with it, so they sent me a production one now. So
brilliant.
Yet to use it, waiting on a machine that needs it, I suppose. So yeah, but I've got one.
You have a VcoreOS 3.
I know, but it's working beautifully as is, so I don't really want to mess with it.
And that is the thing, isn't it? You know, because they sent me the Octopus, and I was like, if I now put this into this machine, that means I'm going to have some downtime on it. I've got some big, I mean, seriously big prints. This is, you know, have you seen the T-Rex skull that they do on Thingiverse? This is 1,000%. This is the lower jaw.
Oh my, that's insane.
That's the lower jaw, and I've got the whole head. This is a 1,600 hour print across 8 printers, including the Rat Rig, and you know, I'm doing stuff with Polymaker as well on a benchy that I'm working on at the moment. So you know, like I say, you know, 3D printing is just such an incredible, absolutely incredible hobby, and certainly when you get into the complexities of printing something more than a square and a benchy, and actually you get some direction on, you know, I'm not printing vases, or you know, you actually maybe even get into CAD, or you get into Fusion, or you get into, you know, a realm that perhaps is, you know, maybe interesting to your life. I think that it's an incredible journey. Mikkel, we have spoken a little bit about the differences between Klipper and VcoreOS, and you know, the complexities of how some people have found that. How have you found designing it and working with it? And what are the key problems that people are experiencing? And again, I don't want to go too hard into this as in we're going to solve everybody's problems here. Where should people look? Where are the answers to the questions?
Right. So, well, first of all, the whole idea with VcoreOS was to make Klipper less scary for people. So they like... Right now, if you go to the Klipper website and go through the installation process, it looks like you need to have a computer science degree, and that's not it's not particularly helpful to newcomers or people just switching over from Marlin or Duet for that matter. So the whole goal was to simplify it and like take care of all the initial installation process, and I think we managed that fairly well. It's basically just flashing an SD card and clicking through a configuration at this point. So it's a lot easier than going with vanilla Klipper at this point. But yeah, basically VcoreOS is just Klipper, Fluid, Moonraker, and then a bit of glue, basically. It's not its own thing. A lot of people think it's like some new thing, or it's not Klipper at all, but it is just Klipper with some configuration and some smart things happening on the Pi to make things easier. So there's a couple of places. There's the official VcoreOS documentation, which has wiring diagrams and like an FAQ and an installation procedure, and so on, slicer settings, all these things that you need to take care of. And then there's the official Klipper documentation, there's the fluid documentation, and there's the Moonraker documentation. And then, of course, there's the Discord. So if you can't really, if you don't have an idea or you're having issues, you can always jump into the Discord and ask. There's a lot of people in there to help. So, yeah, that's where we're at this point.
Cool. Well, what I was just talking to Michael about is that I've seen this pattern from people where they're saying, I'm going to look at the RatRig Vcore3. I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, well, the build looks relatively simple and there's easy instructions. And there are 3 or 4 people out there now that have done this build, and I get it. And I like those people and I can follow what they're doing. And I understand the complexities on how to build a cube. Fine. Then it gets into 2 areas that I think people really struggle with. And that is, what on earth is Klipper? What on earth is all this cabling and wiring and 240, 110 volt business? And that kind of scares people from my experience and what I've been told and what people have been saying to me. Once you get past the Klipper installation, and I know, Mikkel, we worked solidly on mine for a little bit to try and get these things right. And that was the reason that kind of went wrong, is because I deviated from the norm and I took some advice from others. And, you know, it didn't work out necessarily as fluid as it could have been.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things with that. So you can definitely deviate as much as you want, but the more you deviate, the harder it's going to be for you. So we already have like a couple of options. You can pretty much use any extruder you want. We have the BMG, the LGX, the Orbiter, the Hemera, the Titan, and something else. We have a couple of extruders, for example, that you can just pick and choose. Same with the hardened. And the point at where it gets a little difficult is when you start adding motors from like E3D, for example. Then you'll have to deal with the pinout and the motor stepper directions and all these things. And that gets a little complicated for people who haven't either measured stepper motors and find the right coils and pair them up with the board. That's a process, but that's a 3D printing process. That's not a Klipper process. That's general knowledge you need to have if you want to mess with printer electronics.
Michael,
so it's also easily Googleable.
Sorry, yeah? I think, Michael, you've got a video on that on the A's and B's, right? On the motors.
Yeah, I had a troubleshooting video that touched on that briefly.
I used that. So what happened with me is because E3D are based in the UK, they're based in Oxford, which is not too far away from where I live. And I ordered all the stuff originally from E3D. And people are now asking me, what motor should I buy? Or what configuration should I buy from RatRig? And should I source the stuff from elsewhere? And I just went, buy the hardware as much as you want to from RatRig, the frame and all that kind of stuff, but make sure, for goodness sake, make sure you buy the LDO motors, because if you don't, and again, I stumbled with this, and in the end, the X and Y axis on my V3, they are LDOs, but the E3D motors are on the Zs. So, and then I bought extras just in case, but you know, the pinouts, messing around with that, and it took days to reconfigure that particular part. And you know, that was just because it's a lot of trial and error, and then understanding how Core XY is working, and you know, what position is it supposed to go to. And you know, it's very easy to become disillusioned and lost, I guess, when doing something that, you know, there are no instructions for someone that is doing that particular configuration out there, and it is trial and error. And luckily enough for me, Mikkel was there to go, why is that doing that? And I think we spent a fair few hours, didn't we, looking at it as to why it needed to do that. Then going into the VcoreOS system and changing things to make it work the way it needs to work. So one of my biggest fears at the moment is installing the Octopus drivers and going, Mikkel, what? You know, what's happening now? Because, you know, that for me is a pretty scary thing, especially as you said, Michael, you know, I've got a working machine, and do I really want to start trashing that and messing around with it too much? Again, the wiring, you know, all that kind of business again is a bit of a messing with the head. Let's put it that way.
So you have the SKR Pro in there right now, right?
Right now, the SKR Pro, and I've got the Octopus, and the Octopus Pro is coming with 5160 drivers.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not so much the 5160s themselves. It's more that they're high voltage. That's fun.
It's 48 volts as well, isn't it?
It can go up to 60, actually, if you wanted to. But that gets into kind of dangerous territory. So maybe consider that an extra time before you do it. So that part with the steppers is a lot easier now. There's a little more of a guide at the start that tells you what to do if things are weird. I think one of the things you had most trouble with was the sensorless homing part, where the V-Core3 encourages you to use physical end stops, which are like plug and play. Almost like you need to make sure that the pins are correct on the cables. We've had some trouble with that too. People frying their boards because they didn't check the colors on the wires. Sensorless homing is a little difficult because you need to tune the currents of the motors and the sensitivity of the drivers. So there's a little back and forth and tinkering with that. But we made that work pretty fast as well. But you need to know what you're doing, so that's why it's a little more difficult.
Yeah, and that's one of the main issues. Stepping from Marlin into Klipper is, man, that was. But I don't think people should be put off or become disillusioned by that situation. It's a learning curve, and as I say, the feedback that I've had is, well, the frame looks really easy, but I'm scared by these other parts. And part of this, the reason for this video is to talk about that particular situation and maybe put people at ease and show people where those fixes are. And obviously, Michael, you've done a number of videos on the build and including the electronics as well. Is there anything else coming out from you on the Klipper side?
Yeah, I've got in the newest Klipper series, so not specific to the Rat Rig, I'm going to have another video on macros, pressure advance, and input shaping. So again, with the CR10 Max and the Super Racer, just showing different approaches. So for instance, on the Rat Rig, I used everything was beautifully set up again with VcoreOS in terms of the accelerometer. So I plugged it in and sent the command and it tuned itself. So on this other series, I'll cover if you don't have an accelerometer on one of the machines. Just so, both options are there. I was also going to do a video on, where is it? Creality Box, the poorest imitation of Octoprint. So some clever people have made a Klipper WRT branch to install Klipper on this instead of a Raspberry Pi. And I was going to make a video on that, but then an official video came out and I don't need to anymore. But I will mention that in a future video when this goes into the printer.
Interesting. Can I ask a question very quickly to you guys on motherboards? Is the Duet dead on the VCore3?
No, it's not dead. It's not dead at all. You'll definitely get better results with Klipper. I feel pretty confident in saying that at this point. The issue with Duet is that their input shaper, which is pretty important at this point if you want to go faster than usual. The input shaper implementation doesn't have separate settings for X and Y. And that doesn't really make sense for pretty much anything. So you're forced into using the same frequency and the same model for each axis. And that yields interesting results. I believe it has something to do with performance. The boards are not fast enough. That's the advantage with Klipper. You have the Raspberry Pi and the full 4-core CPU on there to do stuff. Duet can't do that. So, yeah. It works, though. You can print beautiful prints with the Duet on a VCore3. It's no problem at all.
So on my 1.3, on my 1.3 version, Mikkel, which is actually something I'm working on at the moment, what board should I put in that?
I'd put the Octopus in there. At this
really?
point.
Okay.
It's a great board. It's a really good board. I've had to experiment with quite a few of those boards at this point, and I gotta say the Octopus is my favorite at this point. And I'm not just saying that because BTT sends me the boards to test them out and implement them, but it's really good. There's a lot of features, and it seems to be very reliable. Unless you short the end stop pins, then your end stop stop working. So don't do that.
No, definitely not. On the sensorless homing on mine, it's absolutely fine now. For the moment, until we upgrade it, though, of course, when we should see what happens with that. But again, it's a learning curve, I think, for everybody. And 3D printing, people have this. I think they almost have this misunderstanding of that they're going to buy the perfect machine, and I think the VCore system is very, very close to being the perfect machine. Certainly in my world, anyway, because it's quick, it's precise. It can be relatively easy to set up if you don't deviate too far from the original setup. Does what I need it to do, and looking at this from a robotics and precision building. I'll take the CR30 as a good example. The CR30 was supposed to print out a load of stuff for this new build that I've been working on, which is the big robot. And unfortunately, the steppers were so far out, I was losing 10 millimeters on each print. And I just didn't have the inclination to sit there and go, I'm now going to start tuning this all up, because I needed to print this thing quick. So everything, the majority of things on that, other than the head, was printed on the RatRig. So, again, it's one of those things where you're only as good as the tuning and the machine that you're actually going to be using. And, I've got near on 30 3D printers here now, and it's just mental. To be fair, I haven't got a lot of room on that, and I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet here. But when you're looking at reliability and you're looking at, certain things like cost, if you're going to go cheap, it's probably not going to be a great experience for you in the 3D printing world for a very long time. And building it yourself, I would say what I could take away from this is if something does go wrong, if I'm getting a bit of belt rub, if I'm, I know how to fix that because I put it together and I assembled it. I understand how that works. I think the complexities of you reverse engineering something that you've installed yourself, I think there's quite a lot of merit in that.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that.
Maybe, Mikkel, you've got an idea on that. I kind of hypothesized, having not tried it myself, on how you would do power out protection with Klipper. I thought maybe you'd run a capacitor bank set to a input pin and write a macro. So if the pin's triggered, it saves the state as variables to know the power's been out when it restarts. Is there a better way than that?
Not that I'm aware of. It's like so you'd have to have the Pi powered on for long enough to do some kind of state saving, like you mentioned there, by saving it into variables. I think that's the only way that you could possibly do it at this point. There's not any official support for power off or power failure or whatever, resume after power failure. I believe there's something coming, but generally their opinion is like if you need to resume after power failure, get a UPS. Of course, that gets a little difficult with a large printer like the V-Core3 because that requires a lot of power. So that's kind of different like equipment you need for that versus say in the 3, for example.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you'd have to do some modding. A capacitor bank or even a power bank could do it for you. So yeah, you need to do that, and you need to set up a G-code macro to save the things, and then you need to figure out how to restore that afterwards. It's kind of involved. If you don't have any experience with Klipper and G-code and programming and electronics, I wouldn't venture that far. Maybe somebody can make like a hint, Mikkel, like a video attempting to do that. I think a lot of people would appreciate that. But yeah, it's gonna be difficult, I think. I
feel like it's the type of thing I feel like I could achieve, but it would definitely be a struggle. I'd be in the pit and have to claw my way out. Lately, I've been playing with 18650 batteries and things like that. So when you said power bank, I'm thinking, oh, I could build. I've got this big one. These are like 38 120s.
Oh yeah,
so it's just like enormous. But these can pump out 100 amps each by themselves. So I imagine this could probably keep a printer going for quite a while. So
yeah, probably.
Maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
Meanwhile, I'll keep the UPS system that I've got in the studio at the moment, and I'm quite lucky because I run a recycling company, and we take a lot of big battery UPSs, battery backups, and stuff out of major big server racks and stuff. So I've been quite fortunate to 2400U, I think they're called, but massive, great big UPSs that I've got in there that run the majority of the printers out there. And touch wood, no major issues with anything like that until I unplugged my V-Core the other day, of course. But hey, stupid is as stupid does, I guess. That's the way it goes. So I did have one further question, I think, on your thoughts on open source. Now, the Rat Rig is obviously open source. Klipper is open source. What else, in your minds, do you think should be open source that perhaps isn't at the moment? I know, Mikkel, you've probably got some comments on that, and I'm keen to understand what they are. Both of you, though, what's your thoughts on that?
I remember teaching open source to high school students a few years ago. And I'd be like, imagine you've come up with this awesome invention, it's going to change the world, and then you just give it away for free. And they'd be like, why would you possibly do that? But I think RatRig, like Prusa's open source, companies like that, if your product is good enough and it's done well, including customer support, documentation, all of that type of thing, people will reward you with their business anyway, rather than going for a cheap clone. I think the model holds up well as long as a company overall, all the the whole experience, not just the hardware by itself, is good. Then it's a perfectly good model, and it's it's really nice for innovation. One of the things I like about the Rat Rig is if you want to take like an off-the-shelf type of configuration, which is how I first built it, then you can. But then if I wanted to tweak it, I could, because the Evercarriage had the other versions, all the files were there if I wanted to remix anything myself. So I had both options. That was really nice.
Yeah,
what about you,
indeed. Yeah, so open source is or it started as a software thing, and then people started doing hardware open source as well, right? And that's the point we're at today. E3D does a lot of open source stuff as well, I think in the hot-end space we need some good competition, some open source competition there. There are not a lot of options right now. You pretty much either have to go with E3D, you have to go with Slice. Then there's Dice in there somewhere in the background, just hanging out. It kind of gets expensive once you get into the high flow stuff. And there's not any real competition in that space. It seems like E3D is going for the beginners, and Slice is aiming for the little bit higher end, and much higher end in some cases. And I'm looking for someone to land right in the middle and give us something, contribute to the community, contribute to the innovation and all the development that happens in the community. We are a lot of tinkerers and nerds who love to spend their free time on this, but not many of us have hardware experience, and this is where I think there could be a lot of progress made.
Where do you think that innovation is going to come from? Do you think that's going to be from Europe, America, West, or in China?
I haven't seen. Well, I guess some of the hardware companies in China are doing open source stuff now, and they are contributing back to the community, which is amazing to see. But it's not that they're not the main driver behind this. It's basically Europeans and Americans, and I believe some Russians too, looking into it. And I've seen, at least in other communities, I've seen a lot of contributions from Russians, which is great. So it's basically the whole world, everyone. That's the beauty of this thing.
On that then, Michael, what are you seeing the changing shifts in the 3D printing world at the moment? I'm personally seeing quality and filament is probably, so the quality of the builds and the polymers that are being released via a plethora of different companies now. I'm doing a lot of work with Polymaker as a good example, and their polycarbonate and their other high-end, high-intensity filaments have been very, very good in certain planetary gearbox builds that I've been working on at the moment. How are you finding that? Are we seeing a shift in that space now, or is it going to be more about 3D printers as a whole?
I'm still frustrated by most of the review offers I get sent are still just clone. People, I don't know, they're very smart. It's very frustrating. Like, I've got this list of things on the contact page. Obviously, people don't read it, but companies don't read it. I have a company say, hey, review this printer. And I literally reviewed it and made 3 videos out of my last 4 on it. And I was pretty harsh on this guy. Feel sorry for him now, but he was like, yeah, toe between his legs after that. So many clones still. Yeah, I don't know. I'm frustrated by that. I reckon room for innovation, which no one is really doing, that I see in other areas, is machine learning. Like, if we're heading towards Klipper and people are going to have more powerful processors with Raspberry Pis and whatever else, I know there's the Spaghetti Detective, which is like an Octoprint plugin, and can use the camera feed to see things are going wrong and intervene. You touched on earlier, like, getting your first 3D printer, there is a hurdle in terms of being a tinkerer and learning all the little ins and outs, and people think they've leveled a bed, and the nozzle's still way too far away, and all those little things. So I think machine learning will be an important step in 3D printing becoming mainstream and being in non-tinkerers' households. So I would like to see more of that and more emphasis on quality, like RatRig. It costs more than a Creality machine and things like that, but you get what you pay for with it. And I've been happy with mine, and I want to see more companies, instead of racing to the bottom and saying, here's our clone, we'll add one superficial feature, think, okay, we're actually going to spot a gap in the market, and we're going to invest in this, we're going to develop this, and we're going to own this space and be the best at it. But a lot of companies don't seem to have that approach, and it's really frustrating.
Absolutely. Well, I've got a couple of other questions just born off of that, but Michael, just to touch on our friends, I won't mention the company name, where I thought I was being very helpful because they said, hey, I see Michael Laws has been on your channel recently. And I was like, yeah, he's a good guy. Can you send him some information about our printers? And I was like, just reach out to him. And he's like, no, I really need your help. And then I contacted Michael and was like, look, this guy's been hassling me. What do you think? And he was like, you sent me a screenshot of all the emails that they'd actually sent you. And it was like, no, they reach out to me daily. I'm like, oh man. And this is, Mikkel, just so you're aware, I'm doing a piece on scams at the moment. So, things like Amazon reviews, a free printer for an Amazon review, that kind of thing. So, and the people that are out there trying to snare people that are new to the market or are reviewers or whatever. So I'm having some real fun with that at the moment, and I'm going to have some stuff out on that very, very soon. But Michael, I'm keen to just get that down about the 3D printing market. If you're brand spanking new to the 3D printing market, what is the 3D printer that you should buy first?
Okay, I'd say it depends on one question. Do you want to use it as a tool, or do you want to use it as a hobby? And that's, different people, different approaches. Most of the time I love tinkering with them, but some of my printers I just use as a tool, and I just want them to stay as they are, and I want them to work. If you're getting into the hobby to learn to tinker, something like an Ender 3 is like excellent bang for your buck. There will be things that go wrong, things that need tweaking, and as you fix all of those problems, you'll learn all about 3D printing. You hopefully wouldn't have spent too much money, and by the time you get to that level of proficiency that you maybe want to expand, you'll know exactly what you want. Like, you can look at a Rat Rig or anything else, and you'll understand why that's better than a cheap machine, because you can say, okay, this was a flaw on my machine, but I can see this feature is here, and that's going to make my life easy. If you want a tool, something like a Prusa. I've had 2 Mark IIIs that were great out of the box. I was an early adopter of the Mini, and that gave me a lot of issues, and I was quite honest with that in my videos. But hopefully now they're all sorted. I've had patrons who got one, and they're quite well sorted. Now, Mikkel, on Rat Rigs, I've had feedback from people saying they would happily spend an extra however many $100 to get one assembled like Prusa do. Is that something you guys have considered?
Well, I don't think that's feasible at this point. I'm not employed by RatRig. I'm just like a user who does things and help them with the development and stuff like that. But they're already like totally underwater trying to keep up with all the demand for just the parts themselves. So I can't like it might be something that could happen in the future if people really want it. But I believe that it would probably have to come like a community thing, like people starting businesses, building printers for other people. There's already quite a few of those in the community, actually. There's a few in Portugal. I know there's one, at least, actually also a beta tester and developer who does that for people. So it would probably have to come at the start, at least, through those kind of people.
The reason I say it is people say, I love the idea of the printer. I just don't have the time. I've got kids, or I just don't have enough spare time to build every nut and bolt. And other people say, oh, it's already more expensive than Chinese machines. It's going to be even more expensive. But then they say, things like Ultimate makers, if you go into the prosumer level, then other machines are way more expensive anyway. So there's actually a gap there for the right price. So
totally, there's room for business there. And I'll take it to the RatRig guys, and they'll they'll probably have a heart attack trying to figure it out.
I understand too, because people want that, but the big machines and the heavy machines, because they're so rugged. So then the postage is going to be a killer.
Yeah, they're really hard to ship.
I guess you could have the top square reconfigured though, couldn't you? With everything installed into the top square and
like
ship
a sub-assembly.
Well,
it's just build the bottom.
I think if we were to do that, like ship it partly assembled at least, we would need to redesign a lot of things so that it comes apart easily and gets put back together easily. I think there needs to happen some design work to make that a painless process. I don't think the V-Core3 is necessarily a good idea platform to like ship it pre-assembled. It's really huge. But we could probably figure something out, but it'll take some work.
And plus, it's things like getting the 500 through the door.
Yeah.
Could be a challenge. If it was,
you can't always do that.
Indeed. Mikkel, what was your first printer? Where would you see the first 3D printing or printer that you would perhaps suggest? Would you say V-Minion, or would you say something else?
Yeah, I would kind of point back to Michael's answer with it really depends on what you need. Do you need a tool, or do you need a hobby? Are you curious? Are you trying to get something done? My first printer was a Anycubic Cosel Delta printer. Jumping into the deep end there. I had so many issues trying to get that thing to print. I had no idea what I was doing. It's a kit like everything else. You have to assemble everything. It comes with Marlin. That was okay. I used that for a month or something. Could barely print on it. Then I switched to Klipper, and that's, I don't remember how many years ago now. And I would not recommend that for anybody getting into it. The Delta is probably the worst, the hardest printer to debug because nothing is linear. So it's very strange. I would go with, if I wanted a tool, I would look at a Prusa, I think. Also because the user experience is just amazing on those printers. The LCD screen tells you everything. It helps you calibrate. It helps you level your bed. It helps do everything. It even has like an introduction thing. When you turn it on, it's like, hello, welcome to blah, blah, blah. It's a different thing, right? It's kind of like and some people will hate me for saying this, but it's kind of like the iPhone of 3D printers.
Yeah, well, I guess it's about the user experience for those guys as well, isn't it? It's about opening the box and going, okay, this is what you need to do. Yeah. And where does, question for both of you guys then, where does the VCore3 sit So maybe you've got a Creality, maybe you've got an Anycubic, maybe you've got some of those other printers that, you know, are there. Where does the VCore3 sit, and how much experience, and I guess that's such a broad question, but how much experience should somebody have before they purchase one of these?
That's a good question. It really depends on the person too. I would say you could easily do it as your second printer, third printer definitely. If you've built something before, no issue whatsoever. If it's your first printer, you might run into some trouble. There's a lot of things to learn. You need to learn mechanicals, you need to learn electronics, you need to learn G code, you need to learn Klipper. There's a lot of stuff to dig your teeth into if you're completely green on the scene.
But it's doable though, isn't it? It's obviously doable.
It's totally doable. We have like plenty of people in the community where their VCore3 was their first printer. So it's definitely possible, but it takes dedication, I'd say, to start building it from scratch as your first printer. It's a learning experience, but it's a very doable learning experience.
Michael, the same question to you. Was there anything when you were putting that together, did you have any issues at all that perhaps weren't documented in the videos?
No, I didn't have anything that I didn't have in the videos. People, when the first one came out, it was a very common question. Is this for beginners? I think I would agree with Mikkel there. Second printer, no problem. Like the physical build, if you can follow instructions, it's not that much more complicated than IKEA assembly, just a lot more steps. You know, probably getting things square is the only area that's harder than that. I'd say the VcoreOS makes the firmware pretty straightforward because you're just flashing that card, adding your Wi-Fi, and you know you're going to have something that more or less works straight away. If you have a couple of axes that are in reverse, that's even if you've got nowhere near to start on a community group, that will be easily solved. So I would say the wiring, is the hardest part. Wiring I used to dislike a lot, but now these days I've got proper crimping tools and connectors and all of that. So if I want something shorter, I could just cut it off and crimp on the right connector, and it's going to be really neat. People that didn't have those tools, that weren't as confident, I would say that's going to be the hardest part for them. But if you're a tinkerer, like Mikkel said, second or third printer, and you've got some of those tools, then don't hesitate at all.
Amazing. Mikkel, how many VCore3s are there out there in the wild right now?
I wish I knew that. I actually have no idea. I know there's
around a spanner into the works there. I thought, I wonder if
I wish I knew. Unfortunately, they don't share that information with the public, and that's including me, apparently.
Okay.
I haven't actually asked. I should probably ask them. But I know we've had around 2,000 downloads of VcoreOS at this point. So there's at least 2,000 printers out there.
That's awesome. And again, you know, this is a small business. It's not a huge manufacturer like out in China. I think people have got to take a little bit of stock of that. You know, I've saw a lot of comments around, well, I'm going to cancel my order. And then someone else chimes in and goes, good, you do that because I'll get mine sooner. You know, I love that whole kind of deviancy on, you know, well, I'm gonna kick off and maybe I'll get something out of this. And you know, unfortunately, with this kind of way of working, you know, you can't procrastinate and kick off like that because it won't get you anywhere. And unfortunately, you're just gonna have to sit there and wait. Simple.
Yeah, it's hard. It's it's not fun. I hate waiting for things, but sometimes it's necessary. Yeah, and those lead times are brutal right now. They just actually just had a LDO shipment delayed by like several weeks because apparently the shipment disappeared and they had to make new motors and stuff. It's bad, and people were not excited. But it's like, what can you do? It's out of their hands. So yeah.
I like how RatRig are so open and honest about what's going on there. You know, there's only so much they can share, obviously, with the end user. But you know, they are pretty good on the Facebook group of coming back with, look, this is where we're at. These are the ones that have been shipped. These are the ones that are in waiting. Here is a load of photos of us actually putting the stuff together. So it is happening. It's not like a glorified Kickstarter where you're investing into something that may never ever happen and it's just out in the ether somewhere. It's in someone's head. You know, this is a company that is functional and it is working, and they are putting these things together, obviously. So
and they have a return policy. They have a warranty. It's like they have to obey European trade laws, and those are very consumer protective. So it's you'll be fine. You'll have all your rights with you if you are ever in doubt. And I don't think many people have had to use those yet. So
good. Yeah, that's good. Well, I think that might be it, unless you guys have got any questions for each other or for, you know, perhaps anything else you want to quickly answer.
Or any secrets you can let out, Mikkel, on the next developments? Any new
Where's
features?
that Delta printer? Where's the Delta printer?
Well, there was actually a Delta printer in the works by the community as like a community developed printer, but I think that one is dead in its tracks. I don't really know what happened with that one. But as you know, we're working on the V-Minion right now. We're just doing the final testing, making sure everything is all right. I actually have it right over here where you can't see it. So you'll hear some news about that very, very soon, like sooner than you might think, even though people have kind of been screaming for some updates because the end of summer thing, and RatRig keeps insisting that end of summer is 21st of September. So you'll probably see something about around about that date, I'll guess.
I'm finding that there seems to be a lot of kind of similar style printers. I saw, obviously, the original was kind of like, in my mind anyway, was the Ender 2, which was kind of similar in that front end, certainly in design. King Rune, I think, have done a horrible job at something like that, where you've got a great big power supply wedged next to the thing there. What's the market for that, Mikkel?
That's a good question. Luckily, I'm not a marketing guy.
Because I mean, I toyed with the idea of it, but for me, I don't, you know, the stuff that I do, and it's generally, as you saw with the dinosaur, you know, it's big things. I don't tend to print tiny little, you know, artifacts and stuff. You know, it tends to be sort of larger scale models and robots and stuff. So, you know, I don't see how that particular printer would fit in for me. But, you know, I was just wondering if it's a good starter printer if you're looking to, you know, cut your teeth on a first build, for example.
Yes, it definitely is. It's a lot simpler build than like a V-Core3, for example. And there's a lot fewer parts. There's a lot less to square, even though you still have to square your things. It's like a good entry level DIY printer kit, I would say. But just it's a Cartesian, so everything is super easy and easy to debug. If you get like print artifacts on one axis, you know where to look, as opposed to even a Core XY, where XY is like two motors interacting at the same time. So it's easier to understand how it works, and it's easier to put together. It's less parts, and of course it'll have VcoreOS support right out of the box. So I think there's a place for it, and it's been immensely popular already. The hype is insane. So somebody prints small parts, apparently. I mean, for everything that I've been printing for the last like many months, which has been printer parts, basically, it'll do everything I need it to. So I could actually do fine with it. And yet I still have a 400 millimeter and a 500 over there. Yeah.
So I had some talk. I had some talk. As you know, the robot I'm working on at the moment for Polymaker is going to TCT in the UK at the end of this month, and I did talk to Sonnet about what I was calling an emoji robot. And the idea is that I would hit a button on a macro, and it would print the emoji, and then basically drop the emoji out. So it'd be a robot that moves around, but the printer is inside the body. And it might put out an emoji turd. It might put out an emoji heart, you know, and you could have it driving around a conference hall, just dropping these emojis on the floor with, you know, the RatRig information on it or something along those lines. I thought that'd be kind of cool. So
yeah, that's fun.
It was one of those kind of alcoholic fueled evenings where I was like, yeah, this is a great idea. Let me message a load of people about it while I'm drunk, you know. But you never know. You never know. Something might come of that. But I love anything that's got some innovation to it that, you know, by the time you've run a couple of, 24 volts on a couple of motors there, you know, you might as well whack a 3D printer in there as well, see what happens. But
why not?
Could be interesting. But listen,
Definitely.
guys, is there anything else at this point?
No, I'll say if you're scared about Klipper, try VcoreOS. But you probably need a RatRig printer for it. But yeah, I'll end with that.
Fair enough. Okay, then, chaps. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. Hopefully, if you are interested in buying a V-Core3 from RatRig, this maybe has answered a few of your questions or put the doubt away, and maybe you should place your order right now. Thank you very much, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Sam.
for having us.
Yep, thanks for having me on.